Good morning, class. This is chapter 22 Descent with Modification, where we discuss Darwin's theory of evolution and natural selection. This is in the BIO101 section. The first thing that I do normally when I start this class is kind of ask my students to tell me what they can see in this particular picture. Okay, so they come up with saying that it looks like a desert, it looks very misty, it looks like no trees, it looks like dry, it also looks like this beetle has sweat or water. Okay, or but none of them are clearly able to see that this beetle is actually doing a handstand. A handstand. Okay. So the reality in this is the Namib desert, and this beetle is actually trying to make do with some water. Now, you must know Namib desert gets the lowest rainfall. So there is scarcity of water, and yet this place has a lot of animals. And how do they survive? What do they do to access water? Well, this beetle does a handstand, and the mist in the early morning kind of condenses and the water droplets roll down to its mouth, and that's how it can survive the day. It can get through the entire day with that much water that it has accessed in the morning. So we all can say that this beetle is very well adapted to the conditions in this particular desert. Yeah? Okay. And then what I do is I normally ask my students to look at this, and I talk about a story that I used to have in my childhood. This is story of 6 blind men and an elephant. So these men were blind. They had never ever seen an elephant before, and each one of them were taken to a part of the elephant and then asked to tell what they think that they are actually presented with. The man who was near the tail thought it was a rope. The man who was near the trunk thought it was a snake. The man who was near the tusk thought it was a spear. The man who was near the ears thought it was a fan. The man who was near the body of the elephant thought it was a wall. The man who was near the foot of the elephant thought it was a pillar. So you see, all of these men are looking at the same creature. It is right there in front of them, but they are looking only at a part of it. And they made a conclusion. The conclusion, as you can see, is not correct. Why is this wrong? The reason it is wrong is because they have only looked at a part of it and they have made up their mind about it. So what I would like to emphasize in this chapter is we are going to talk about Darwin and how he tried to look at the bigger picture. he read up about the works and the thoughts expressed by other men before him, and he observed a lot, took copious notes, and then he made a few inferences, and then he came up with certain conclusions. So you can see that his conclusion is more comprehensive. Okay, it sort of gives us a very good idea of the biggest question that we have in land. He actually set the ball rolling about natural selection. So though he never ever used the word evolution in his books, he kind of worked towards saying that everyone tried to get better suited to the environment that was provided to them at that particular time. So you see, this is exactly what I was talking to you when I wrote down about the conclusions the 6 blind men had made. So we talk about Charles Darwin, who is accredited to have come up with the best theory to explain life as we see it. And we then also first talk about a timeline about who shaped Darwin's thinking. Okay. So first, a little bit about Darwin. So he was not very rich, and he initially wanted to be a clergyman. He also joined medical school, and then he kind of felt that none of these things interested him, and almost in the last minute he signed up to be a companion to the captain of the ship, the HMS Beagle. HMS Beagle. That's what this ship was called. What was the purpose of this ship? She was actually commanded to go and chart the land or make maps. So they had a lot of cartographers who were trying to make the map of the continent. Okay, so his route started with Great Britain, then went over towards South America, then to Cape of Good Hope, into the Polynesian Islands, or very close to that, and then Australia, and then from the other side he kind of came on to South America's, the other side of the continent of South America, and down to the bottom to the Cape Horn, and then back again to Great Britain. Okay, so this was his journey. During this journey, what did he do? He collected a lot of specimens. He made a lot of observation about the flora and fauna of the place. Okay. So, before Darwin, we had the most famous figure who kind of set the ball rolling for people to think about life around them was Aristotle. And Aristotle kind of, in accordance to the times that he lived in, said that everything has a place, and it was all already decided and set. Then we had a scientist called Cuvier. He was a paleontologist. Interestingly, he's the one who's come up with the theory of catastrophism. Okay, let me just go back to the next slide. Okay, so Cuvier he was a paleontologist. So he kind of studied sedimentary rocks. Now, what is a sedimentary rock? Is you would have layers and layers of deposited sediment which kind of solidified under great pressure and became rock like. So when paleontologists work on any of these sedimentary rocks, they kind of try to remove it gently, layer by layer. Now when they did this, he noticed that the topmost layer is the most recent. The bottommost layer is the oldest. Okay, and he compared the fossils that he observed in the older layers to the fossils that he observed in the newer layers, and he noticed that what he saw in the older layers, he never found them in the newer layers, and it was always different. There might have been a tad bit of a relationship between adjacent layers, but the topmost layers had creatures that had nothing to do with the bottommost. So though he had everything right in front of him, the conclusion that he made was creatures lived in a certain place because the land was fertile, and then suddenly there was a huge big catastrophe like a flood, a meteorite hitting, earthquake, or a huge big tsunami, or any of these catastrophes that completely destroyed all the living forms in that area, and then newer living forms came to live in that place after that. So this was his theory to explain why in the older fossils, whatever fossiler creatures that he observes is not related to the fossils which were more new. Okay, and if you notice, a lot of geological discoveries, you would see fossils of a creature which was similar, like a relative of that you can see in the more recent times. Okay, so you can see that there is a relationship, but there is also a lot of change. Okay. Let me go back to a few slides back. Okay, so we talk about Aristotle, we talk about Cuvier and his catastrophism. Then we talk about Linnaeus. I actually covered this with my class in the lab, but a little bit about Linnaeus. He is the one who is called the father of nomenclature, meaning he is the one who did the classification. So kind of put animals or living creatures, animals and plants which are similar under the same group, and the different ones under different groups. Okay, and this led to the grouping of all living creatures, which was known as classification. And he is the one who has come up with a system of binomial nomenclature. Okay, then we talk about a geologist called Hutton. Okay, just a second, let's go to that slide. So the geologist James Hutton and Charles Lyell perceived that changes on the Earth's surface can result from slow and continuous actions that are still operating the same way that it did in the past. Okay, so which means, okay, so then the geologist Charles Lyell came up with the principle of uniformitarianism. Okay, which states that the mechanisms of changes that happened are constant over time. Okay, so I would like for you to watch a video just a tad bit to understand what these geologists were trying to explain and concluded.
James Hutton was born on June 3rd, 1726 in Edinburgh, Scotland. There, he was born to William Hutton, who was a merchant in a former Edinburgh city.
I am moving the video to the part that we need to see. Okay.
Our community offices. Prior to his study, Europe had used literal dates out of the Bible for the age of the earth. James instead looked at rocks and soils. From this he knew that rocks are created under land to form new elevations. Also knowing how slow the cyclic process took, he deduced that the earth was actually much older than the Bible had depicted it to be. Yet, he did not have a way to thoroughly prove this or show how old the earth truly was. By 1784, the Royal Society of Edinburgh asked Hutton to lecture on his theory on March 7, 1785. He was ill, so Joseph Black, his friend, delivered it for him. The title was Concerning the System of the Earth, Its Duration and Stability. He, of course, was laughed off and was made to look like he was attacking the Christian church by opposing a date that was in the Bible. He now took time off and sailed down the North Sea west of Scotland to look at the exposed rocks and cliffs. After gathering enough evidence, he wrote a book in 1795 that explained his theory more thoroughly. The theory on Earth was a name, but it did not receive the critical acclaim that he had hoped for. This was due to his poor writing and poor health during the time. Soon after, in 1797, he died, unmarried, in Edinburgh, Scotland. He is most famous for his publication, which was The Theory on Earth, although it wasn't recognized until 5 years after his death. It was recognized when his friend, John Playfair, published Illustrations of the Huttonian Theory of Earth, in which he summarized and gave a clear explanation of Hutton's work so everyone could see his accomplishments. James Hutton is modernly known as the father of geology.
Okay, so this is not my video. I just picked this video from YouTube to help my class. I would like to just go back to the part here, right here,
which he summarized and gave a clear explanation of Hutton's work.
Okay, so he just said that geological processes are very, very slow and gradual, and a lot of time is required to see their influence. And the earth is much more older than a few thousand years. Okay, as was assumed and said during the times before and during his lifetime. Okay. Okay, so we go back to my. So my point was in this, James Hutton kind of looked at the deposition of rocks and the way it was formed, the earth's surface was formed in different parts of his own land that he owned, and in that he noted that this particular kind of formation could not have been formed, it is not young in the sense it would have taken a lot more time than just 6,000 years, which is what they thought the age of the earth was. Okay. So Lyell, on the other hand, he came up with the rate at which sediments get deposited. He measured the thickness of the rock layers, and then he kind of said that the age of the earth is millions of years old, and subtle repetitive changes have been shaping the earth over a very long period of time. Okay.
From the creation of ice ages to the effects of global warming, the Earth's climate is a roller coaster of change. And our next great discovery helped put it all into perspective. For centuries, people believed that the Earth was shaped by catastrophes, like the biblical flood. But in the early 1800s, an Oxford-educated lawyer named Charles Lyell shattered that belief and revolutionized geology. Lyell spent years traveling the world, studying an overwhelming number of rock formations and fossil samples. He had a brilliant eye for detail, and piece by piece, he began to see that the rocks told a different story. While catastrophes such as volcanoes, earthquakes, and floods occasionally affected the planet, the greatest changes were the result of an incredibly slow and natural geological process. A process driven by wind, water, erosion, and the heating and cooling of the Earth. A record of those changes was contained in the layers of rock. But here was Lyell's most radical insight. The mechanism for that slow process of geological change was time. Lots of time. The Earth, Lyell argued, was far older than was generally accepted, and he presented proof of his findings in a landmark book called Principles of Geology. Today, its publication is considered the birth of modern geology. Sam Bowring is a professor of geology at MIT.
I think very important in Lyell's development of thought was a trip to see the volcanoes of Italy and Vesuvius, I believe in particular, where he actually saw that the mountain was built up of successive flows, and they had some of these, they had a good idea of when they were erupted because they were historic, and he was able to use that to extrapolate that the volcano itself must be hundreds of thousands of years old, and at the time, talking about hundreds of thousands of years was revolutionary. Others argued for a directionality in evolution, that the Earth on day one is not the same as the Earth today. Some secular change has occurred, and this is a debate that geologists have today. Were plate tectonics operating 4.5 billion years ago, or is it something that developed later on in Earth history?
Today, many consider Charles Lyell to be the Charles Darwin of geology. In real life, the connection between the two men was significant.
Darwin took a first edition copy of Volume 1 of Lyell's treatise on his cruise with the Beagle. And what he realized from reading this, as he was also simultaneously worrying about evolution, was that here was the solution to evolution. We had limitless time.
Lyell's discovery set off a firestorm of interest in determining the true age of the Earth. Until then, most everyone believed that the planet was young. But with the publication of Lyell's seminal book, geologists wanted to know how young. Our next great discovery.
Okay. So, these were the two geologists whose works influenced Darwin's thinking. Okay. Then we talk about Lamarck. Now, who is Lamarck? Unfortunately, Lamarck came up with the right word, but wrong conclusion. Okay, so he is the one who has come up with the word species evolve. Okay, but the wrong conclusion. According to him, if a giraffe has got a short neck and is searching for food, and it finds food in a slightly tall tree, and it has to stretch its neck, So its neck gets stretched further, and that is how a giraffe has evolved. So basically, a snake has lost its limbs because it is burrowing through a hole which is hindering its arms, and its arms fell off and it became a limbless creature. So this was his theory of use and disuse of body parts and inheritance of acquired characteristics. Now, what I mean by that is acquired. You acquire it in your lifetime. You cannot pass it in your genetics. Meaning, I give the example to my class, anyone who is like a Mr. Universe. So he is like builds his muscle, okay, he trains, and then he becomes the really well muscled strong man. Mr. World or Mr. Universe is what he is like. He earns the title, but that does not mean his child is going to be exactly like that in shape when the child grows up. He has to also work out and acquire it. So, what a person acquires in their lifetime cannot be passed down the next generation. So, that is the difference between inherited characteristics and acquired characteristics. Okay, so this was unsupported by the evidence. Okay, but Lamarck's words of species evolve kind of helped him move forward. Okay, now another scientist, or rather we would say economist, who influenced Darwin's thinking was Malthus. Thomas Malthus was a clergyman and an economist. What he said was, as the population size increases, resources dwindle and the struggle to live intensifies. This increases conflict. There is war, famine, and disease. Okay, so basically, he was saying that we are our own enemy. All right, if we keep increasing in number and the earth does not have enough food to give and make everyone be able to live. So, and that's why you would have more people dying, more people fighting for it, and more diseases coming into foray. So, what did Darwin do in addition to reading these people's work? He collected specimens, like I had explained, and he also had a first-hand observation. Observation of what? He actually experienced an earthquake, and he was actually in the Andes Mountains at that time. Okay, when he experienced the earthquake in the Andes Mountains, he saw fossils which were having shells and marine creatures, and there was no way that they were close to the sea. They were not close to the sea at all. So, which means the ages, or there has been continuous changes on that particular land brought about by different mechanisms like earthquake, storm, volcano, and other tsunami and other catastrophes. These have been working to change the environment from what it was. This was one of the things that he kind of observed. And he also then observed finches in different islands. Okay, so I would like for us to be able to see these and get an idea. The video in a minute. So he went to the Galapagos Islands, which is close to the equator, away from the mainland, and he observed 13 species of finches across the several islands that he saw. Each of these finches had a different body form and their lifestyle was different. That correlated with the kind of environmental challenges they were facing in that particular island. Meaning, one island was nice and green, there were lots of trees, and so there was a finch that would be able to access insects from the grooves of the bark of the tree, and so it had thin, sharp beak. Okay, then there were places where it was able to live on just soft fruits, in some places where it was able to live on cactus, and in some places it was absolutely dry. It had the ability to break the hard nuts, so the beak was different. So I would like for us to be able to see this video. Let me see if I can pull it up.
Although he didn't realise it at the time, the most important specimens that Charles Darwin brought back from the Galapagos were finches. Initially, he wasn't sure how they were related, but when, back in England, they were examined by the ornithologist John Gould, he reported that in fact Darwin had brought back 13 different species of finch, all of which were unique to the Galapagos. This realisation played a significant role in Darwin's formulation of his theory of evolution. The most important differences between the finches came in their beaks. Some were large, some were small. Each one was suited to the availability of particular foodstuffs. Eventually, Darwin theorised that different species of finch had evolved on different islands, their distinctive beaks being an adaptation to distinct natural habitats or environmental niches. In the years since Darwin's visit, many other scientists and ornithologists have come to the Galapagos to study its finches. In this experiment, researchers are observing the woodpecker finch, using this wooden box to stand in for a tree. The woodpecker finch is one of the only birds to use tools to help it find food. A stick or small twig enables it to dig deeper into tree bark for insect larvae. This skill enables it to survive in conditions which other birds would find difficult. In the dry season, it can gather up to 50% of its food in this way. Woodpecker finches are hungry birds, which in the wild need to eat every 3 hours, so they never turn down the chance of a free meal.
Okay, so hopefully that was interesting and helpful. So we have the different kind of finches with the different kind of food preferences and their different beaks. So you have the cactus eater, insect eater, and the seed eater. Okay, so the conclusions that he made was the adaptation to the environment and the origin of species are closely related. And evolution, he didn't use the word evolution, he just said descent with modification over a period of time. So there was a pattern revealed by data, and that pattern can be observed in the field of biology, geology, physics and chemistry by observing the natural world. Okay, so the first thing that he put forward was variations exist. Individuals in a population vary in their heritable characteristics, meaning no two individuals are same. They have variations, they have some specialization. In this, you would just call them all snails, but if you notice, their shells are different shades, yeah, different shaded kind, different size, and so different environmental niches would be favorable for them to survive and continue to proliferate. Okay. The second thing that he also noticed was organisms produced more offspring than the environment can support. Now this is actually a fungus, okay, and if you notice the spray of cloud that you notice or dust that you notice, it is not dust at all. It is actually spores. It is millions and millions and millions of spores. But not all of those spores are going to be able to grow and become this huge big mushroom again, right? For example, I tell my class, if they have like an acorn tree in their backyard and all the acorns that fell, I asked them how many acorn trees that they got the next year. Kind of know. Why? Two reasons. One reason, we kind of sweep them all away. Second reason, if we leave it to its own self, many of them just fall on the road. Many of them fall under the tree. They might be not getting enough sunlight, so it barely sprouts, but then it dies off. Many of them get trampled. Many of them get eaten. So there is far more number of offsprings actually produced than that can grow and completely reach adulthood, right? So the observations that we can put together are: individuals in a population will vary in their heritable characteristics. Okay, they will vary. You will have variation. Remember the snails? Okay. Organisms produce more offspring than the environment can support. Remember the mold that I showed you just now? The mushroom. Okay. With this, what can you infer? The organisms or the individuals that are well suited to the environment will leave more offspring than other individuals. Like I would like to say, if they are well suited, they are likely to find food, grow to adulthood, find Mrs. Snail and have more babies and pass his genes to the next generation, which will start to look like him. Alright? So over time, you will have favorable traits accumulating in the population. And that is why sometimes when you look at something, you'll say, oh my God, this looks exactly like that. Let's see the pictures now. So you have the words of Darwin saying descent with modification. And to prove his point, he used the example of artificial selection. He used farm animals, dogs and plants, as you can see in the next page. So he kind of put this family tree to say or to bring back these many variations exist, but they all come from the grey wolf, which is the common ancestor. Okay, and with plants, if you notice, wild mustard is the original ancestor from which we have so many variations that we have artificially created and been using farming practices. We have the cabbage, we have cauliflower, we have broccoli, kohlrabi, kale and Brussels sprouts. All of them are kind of sort of from the same family, related, cousin-like, but have the common ancestor and yet different. In the meanwhile, Alfred Wallace, we should not forget, he was in the Polynesian Islands and he was a biogeographer. He also noted a lot of similar but different animals from island to island in Polynesia. Let me just go back. Polynesian Islands. and he had heard about Darwin. What did he do? He developed a concept similar to natural selection at the same time as Darwin, and he presented the paper to with Darwin in 1858. At this particular time, Darwin felt very, very dejected because he felt that his theories, which he came up with first, won't be recognized. But Lyell supported him and encouraged him to publish his paper and present it to the Royal Society in England. And so in 1859, Darwin published the book Origin of Species. So, a summary of that would be individuals with certain heritable characteristics survive and reproduce at a higher rate than the other individuals. So, natural selection increases the adaptation of some organisms to their environment over a period of time. If the environment changes, then natural selection may result in adaptation to these new conditions. This might give rise to new species. Okay, and this is like a timeline of different people over a period of time in these years who kind of, okay, so when they made their work known, and then finally in 1859 Darwin published his book. Okay, so adaptation is a process in progress. So if you notice, this is a cuttlefish. If you didn't see it, now you can probably see it more keenly and observe that there is a cuttlefish there. And this cuttlefish did not become exactly blending to the sand and rocky areas and the seaweeds that it sees, so it has this blend of those colors overnight. It did not happen overnight. There might have been various different varieties of characters in the entire population of cuttlefish, of which if they belonged to this environment, this kind of variety was able to avoid being observed when they were hunting for prey, and so they were able to catch more prey, grow into adulthood, find Mrs. Cuttlefish, have more babies having the same quality, passing it down, and over a period of time you then look at the population, all of them look exactly like this, and you kind of say, oh no, how did that happen? How did it look exactly like the environment that it is living in? Okay, so the least successful alleles will become less common or can get wiped out, or be present in very small numbers. Okay, so this change leads to fitness, wherein there is increased adaptation to the environment. Another one is the ability to have movable bones in snakes, kind of gave them the advantage of being able to swallow something that was larger than what their mouth size is. So, adaptation is any inherited behavioral, morphological, or physiological trait that maintains or increases the fitness of an individual organism under a given set of environmental conditions. This is very, very, very important. If the environment changes, then the population is again kind of if it has to survive, the variants that are present, the small numbers that are present, maybe this is the time for them to have a better fitness to the new environment that is present, and so they have more chances of increasing in numbers and passing down their genes So future generations might have their quality, and the entire population, majority of them, will end up having their qualities. Okay, if some of these heritable changes or traits are advantageous, they will accumulate in the population, and this will increase the frequency of the individuals in that population, and this process explains the match between the organisms and their environment. So if you notice in this particular picture, you have a praying mantis here. These are the hands of that praying mantis. Okay, this is one leg. Okay, so this is the other leg, if you notice, but it resembles the flower exactly. This did not happen overnight. This took many years of evolving and getting selected because they continue to be in that environment. Okay, again, this is another praying mantis which resembles the stick. Okay, so what is biological success? I always ask my class, what is biological success? So biological success is reproducing and passing on your genes to the next generation. That is biological success. Okay, so remember, individuals do not evolve. A population evolves over a period of time. Natural selection can only increase or decrease heritable traits in a population. And adaptations vary with different environments. So I have listed out 4 examples or proofs with examples. Okay, so this was listed by Charles Darwin. So first one is direct observation of evolutionary change. Okay, this is a direct observation. So the example, the way it goes is, there is a particular fish, and there is a particular predator that preys on these fish. The predator, if it is a different predator, it preys on a different age group of the same kind of fish. Okay, let's see what happens in the next picture, and then we can come back. Okay, so there are 2 examples provided with evidence for natural selection. Okay, so first, the direct observation of evolutionary changes. A scientist called John Endler, what did he do? He studied effects of predators on a wild guppy population, guppy fish in a natural body of water. So he saw that there are brightly colored males, and then there are dull drab females, but there are also dull drab males. Brightly colored males and dull drab males. However, if they are brightly colored, they are also more vulnerable to predation. So guppy population in any pool which had no predators or few predators, they had a lot of brightly colored males because there was nothing to eat them up, and females kind of liked them, so their entire population, in a majority of them, looked brightly colored. Okay, so this is the first observation. And then what happened was, he kind of had this artificial lake. Okay, in this artificial lake, he first had one predator called killifish. This killifish preyed on the juvenile guppies, meaning they were young and they still did not show whether they were going to be brightly colored or dull. They were equally attacked by this particular fish, killifish. Okay, so in this, the adult males have brighter colors than those in the pike cichlid, meaning you did have brightly colored fishes higher in number in this. On the other hand, they had kind of like a second pool in which there is no killifish, but there is no guppies prior to the transplant. They like kind of have like a just the killifish present in it. Then they removed the killifish predator and they added pike cichlid predator. Okay, this preyed on the adult colorful guppies, which means the dull drab guys escaped because they could blend, and so they were higher in number. The dull fellows were higher in number in this pool. So my point is, okay, let's just reword or go over the whole experiment one more time. Okay, so this is a pool and this is another pool. In this pool they had a predator called killifish. In this pool they had a predator called pike cichlid. This killifish liked to eat dull juveniles, younger ones, in which case the brightly colored guppy population was high. Okay, in this way, in this particular pool, these pike cichlids ate only the bright ones. So the dull adult were higher in number in this one. So you see, depending on what kind of predator was present, that influenced the kind of population of the guppy, and it changed. Once you change the environment, depending on what kind of predator that you have, it changes the dynamics of the prey population. That is what he's trying to say. You can directly observe that by changing the environment. Okay, so that is what I have written down here. The Endler transferred brightly colored guppies with few predators to a pool with many predators. As predicted, over time the population became less brightly colored. Then he transferred the drab colored guppies with many predators to a pool with fewer predators. The population became more brightly colored. When he added a predator who ate the younger drab juveniles, they were more colored adult because the females preferred to choose them. Okay, another example of direct observation is this particular organism, bacteria called Staphylococcus aureus. It is commonly found in people. One of the strains is a methicillin resistant Staph aureus or MRSA. It is a very dangerous pathogen. It has become resistant to penicillin and in 1945. Then in 1961 it has become resistant to methicillin. Okay? And now this MRSA, what it does is, the population of MRSA is constantly evolving depending on what kind of stressor is being added to them. The stressor being the antibiotic. Okay, so now the MRSA strains are resistant to many antibiotics. So it is the same Staph aureus, but it has kind of evolved over a period of time and become resistant to all the different stressors that they have faced in their environment and survived. The survivors are all resistant to the antibiotics. So it has become a multi-drug resistant Staph aureus. Okay, so that's what he's trying to say. When he's looking at the chromosome map of the Staph aureus, he can see that it has developed resistance to a number of antibiotics and also has increased disease severity it has greater ability to colonize host, it has also greater ability to do this gene exchange, and also greater ability for toxin production. Okay, so remember, natural selection does not create, it is not suddenly creating from scratch. Not from scratch. It only edits and selects for traits that are already present in the population. So the local environment determines which traits will be selected for or selected against in any specific population. Okay, then we come to the next part, wherein we are talking about the second proof that he was trying to offer was homology. Homology basically means you have a different function of the structure that you're looking at. So if you just observe human hand or leg of a cat or fin of a whale or a wing of a bat, they look different. They have different functions. Hand has functions where you kind of work with. Cat leg is for walking. Whale fin is for swimming. Bat wing is for flying. But underlying structures are the same, which means they are having a common ancestor, or they originated from a common ancestor. So homology is basically, or homologous structures is different outer functions but same underlying structure, and that kind of tells you they have risen from a common ancestor, mammals. Now, we also have something known as vestigial structures that need to be mentioned. These are remnants of features that served important functions in the organism's ancestors. Okay, you also see examples of homologies at molecular levels when you look at genetic code. And genetic code is like universal, no matter if you are a lowly bacteria or a human being or a fish or a frog or a bat or a cow, genetic code is common. And that kind of is also the underlying help that gives us to understand that we have a common origin. And then when I am talking about this, we have to also mention something that is capable of evolving because conditions were similar, not because ancestor was common. So that is convergent evolution and analogy or analogous structures. What I mean to say is, if you notice, there is a particular eutherian. Okay, and this is a mammal. Okay, now this is a sugar glider. Okay, and it is found in Australia, and it can kind of jump from one tree to the other. It has the same outer function. So outer structure is very, very similar, but they don't have a common origin. No common origin. This is analogous structures. Okay, another example of a analogous structure is the squid eye and human eye. There isn't any common ancestor between squid and humans, and yet you would see that in similar conditions that they have been exposed have given rise for their species to evolve to have an eye which kind of looks similar and has the similar function, okay, from the outside, but it does not have common ancestor. So convergent evolution is a group of similar or analogous features in distantly related groups. They arise independently and adapt to similar environments in similar ways. So, convergent evolution does not provide any information about ancestry. So, analogous structures are adapting or arising because of similar environments. Okay. The third example or the third proof is fossil records. Okay, what is a fossil record? What does it give us? It gives us extinction of species and also gives us an idea of how new groups originated and what changes occurred over a period of time. So, I like to give my class an example. Like, I have this old shoebox in my attic and it has a lot of these pictures, but none of them are kind of dated. So what I would do is I would keep them all out and then I would kind of try to sort, oh, this was done at this year because this one and this one was there, this was not there, and I kind of sort this and put them all in different time or years depending on what I see and what I remember from my memory. And similarly, if you just took all the fossil records, put them all on, you kind of get an idea of which creature evolved first, which creature is more recent, and which one is to be in between any of these two creatures. And you kind of get a timeline about their origin and their family tree. Okay, so the example that he gives us in this is, you can see that there was at some point in time some kind of relationship with this particular creature called the Barythrium. Actually, you kind of see that in Ice Age in one of the cartoons. But in any case, the relationship between the Asian elephant, the African elephant, Loxodonta africana, Loxodonta cyclostis, is kind of, you can see where and when they might have originated and when they might have diverged. And it also gives you an idea of where the woolly mammoth was and where we are in our timeline. Okay. Plus, in addition to that, when you look at the different fossils, you can see that once upon a time Pachycetus was a terrestrial creature, and then from there it evolved to have the next kind, which were from that population they evolved to give you Rhodocetus, which kind of became aquatic. And after a few fossils down the line, you can see that they became completely aquatic, with the pelvis and the hind limb becoming very, very small and losing significance. And you can see the most recent whale ancestor, Balena, which is completely aquatic. Okay, and this is what is related to your whale. So you can kind of find out who was your forefather or who was this whale's forefathers or ancestors, and you can put them all in pictures. This was during this years ago, this many million years ago, this is younger, and this is between these. So you put it in, arrange it by looking at their bone formations and the modifications that have evolved over a period of time. Okay, then we come to another situation wherein this is the biogeography. So I would like to go back to the previous slide and talk about continental drift of the plates or the land masses that we had. So 225 million years ago we existed on the earth as Pangea. Okay, and then slowly the plates kind of drifted. Then we had Gondwana land, then we had the different Americas and the different continents, and then you have the earth as this, as what is it now. How did we know it existed like this? or how do we know it is now been like this from there? You kind of look at the fossil record, and then you look at how the geological plates have moved. Depending on that, they have made a prediction that the most ancient form of horses came from the North Americas, and it was true. When they actually looked for fossils, they found the most ancient form here, and this is explained by the concept of biogeography, wherein the geographic distribution of species is very, very important in the part of his theory of evolution. So he's saying that islands have many endemic species, that is most commonly related to the species on the nearest mainland or island. Then the continents drifted. Once you know the pattern of their drift and you know the anatomy of the organism, you can kind of chalk out as to where you can find the fossil of different groups of organisms, like the example of horses that I just quoted. So, the Earth's continents were formerly united in a single large continent called Pangaea, but have since separated by continental drift. An understanding of the continent and movement and the modern distribution gives us the ability to predict when and where the different groups have evolved. Let me just go back to this picture to show. So we might have had camels, okay, right here. One second. Let me just put that. We might have had camels right here. They might have crossed over, okay, and you have the llamas here, which look similar to the camels but very different, because they have evolved because of the conditions or the climate, the food and other environmental factors that they have been exposed to, and they are very different from the camels that are found in Africa. Similarly, if I have some islands here and I have, say, finches, they probably most closely resemble the finches on the mainland. That is what he's trying to say. And not with something else which has similar weather somewhere else. Okay, so the evidence that Darwin's theory was correct was provided by direct observation. The example was guppy fish. You must remember that. Fossil records, wherein we were talking about how whale, land animals and water vertebrates and land vertebrates kind of were put together, and you kind of find out who were whose ancestors and how they kind of moved on to the water and who was its closest ancestor on land. Then we talk about homology, wherein we are talking about the forelimbs of 4 mammals into consideration. Then biogeography, wherein we are talking about the origin of horses with the knowledge of movement of the continents and the anatomy of the particular species that we are looking at. His theory, that is Darwin's theory, accounts for many observations and explains and integrates a great variety of phenomena. It stands up to continual and thorough testing. Okay, so that completes this chapter on chapter 22. All right, and I hope that was useful.